Okay, we're finishing up in the Siddur preparations for Shabbos. Tomorrow we'll be starting a new series from 3 to 3:45 on Hanukkah. Various things that we could learn out from Hanukkah about how to develop our spirituality, how to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's going to be a separate series altogether. So I want to take a look at, depending upon time, a couple of texts which are from Chumash actually, but we recite them in the prayers of Shabbos, and there are certain features which I would like to express to you, which aren't often discussed. So in this copy of the Siddur, Psalm 347, this is Vayechulu. Now, you have to understand that this paragraph comes at the end, or the beginning of the second chapter of Genesis, after the sixth day of creation has been completed. Vayivoker Yom Ashishi. It was evening, it was morning, it was the sixth day. 6th day has been done, finished, and over with. All 6 days of creation have now been finished. And now the paragraph starts by saying, I don't know why they put in the thus in the Hebrew, in the English. The heaven and the earth were finished, and all their legion, all the things that are in them. So that's a retrospective. The 6 days are done, and on the 6 days, all of the heaven and the earth are finished. The very first verse said, Kadosh Baruch Hu was creating the heavens and the earth, and now it says, the heavens and the earth were finished. Okay, and then the next words are, on the 7th day, God completed his work, which he had done, introduces certain ambiguities. Completed on the 7th day. And then it says, and he abstained on the 7th day from all his work, which he did. Now it's getting very complicated. Getting very complicated. We first are told that everything was finished in the 6 days. And then it says he completed it on the 7th day. That's an open contradiction. If it was already finished on 6 days, they didn't do any on the 7th day. And in that very verse it says, on the 7th day he completed, and also on the 7th day he abstained from all of his work. How can you complete something by abstaining from it? Abstaining means not doing it. There's a famous statement in Chazal about this. Once he finished everything on the 6 days, what was the world missing? I need some candidate for something the world didn't have, which could then be what it is he did on the 7th day, even though he didn't do anything on the 7th day, and even though everything was done on the 6 days. What could it be? And the answer is rest. Because if you contribute rest, you're not doing anything, you're resting. So here's how you could finish the creation. Add rest in by resting and not doing anything. So you're not doing anything. So you're only resting. You know, when you read it first time round, it sounds less than fully serious. Well, I mean, if you're resting, you're resting. If you're not doing, you're not doing. If you're not doing, you're not completing. Like what? What are you getting out of this? How does it help? You want to say something? No. So I think there's something very important going on here. Now, as I have told you, I'm only a philosopher, so I see certain things in my way, and there could be other ways of explaining it. Let me give you an example of something similar. In the Derech Hashem, in the way of God by Lutzato, in part 2, chapters 2 and 3, he gives a lot of reasons why HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things in the world, what the purpose is of what he does. And then at the end he says, and in addition to all of these ways, all of these purposes for which things are done, sometimes Kadosh Baruch Hu will do A as a means to doing B, doing something else. So not always is the reason for what's done in the thing that's done. It could be the thing that's done is meant to bring about something else, and the reason is something else. So when I first read that, I thought to myself, why does the Kadosh Baruch Hu do it that way? And he proves it. He says, there's a Gemara that says that a farmer's ox broke its leg, and while he was attending to the ox's leg, he found something that disturbed him in the ground at that point, and he discovered a buried treasure. So the Ramchal says, you see, the Gemara is telling you, the ox broke its leg so that he would find the buried treasure. So you have various purposes for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to do things, to give reward to the righteous, to punish the wicked, to awaken the people who made mistakes to do better, to set up tests for them so that they'll grow spiritually, to fulfill the tikkun that they were created for. There are lots and lots of reasons why HaKadosh Baruch Hu does things. And with those reasons, the thing happens and you say, why did that happen? And you get an answer. This happened because it has Q. And Q is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. That's a very tight system. Each thing that happens has some purpose that it fulfills. Then the Ramchal says, but it isn't really that tight. It isn't really that tight because you see, sometimes we ask why A happened, the answer will be, there's no particular reason for A other than A brought us to B, and B has an explanation. B serves a purpose. B has a value. So I thought to myself, why tolerate that? Why tolerate that? Why not just set it up? Couldn't the Kodesh Baruch Hu do it in such a way that everything that's done has its own purpose? I'm testing your memory skills now. So put that on hold. And there's another one. We have on record what happened in the Garden of Eden, that Adam and Chava failed. They were expelled from the Garden of Eden, and all of our history took place. What would have happened had they succeeded? There are sources that tell us that. They would have had children, a certain number of children, certain things would have happened. There are sources that tell us that. Which means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu set up what we would call a contingency plan. In fact, they failed. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, knowing everything, knew they were going to fail. And even so, he set up a contingency plan. What will happen if they don't fail? Now that's very strange. A contingency plan? We set up contingency plans precisely because we don't know what will happen. And we have to be prepared. But Kadosh Baruch Hu knows what's going to happen. Why would he set up a contingency plan? So now we have three questions on the table. What got completed on the seventh day? And why would the Kadosh Baruch Hu make certain events just means to other events? And why would the Kadosh Baruch Hu make contingency plans? And I believe I know the answer to the questions 2 and 3. I believe that's the answer to question number 1 also. And what triggered me on this was I was teaching, went to Australia twice, and I was in Melbourne, and I was teaching the Lakewood Gottleib there, sort of share for them. And I think it was the idea of contingency plans came up. And they, it was a means to ends. I mentioned the thing means to ends. And one of the chaverim of the Gottleib said to me, why would the Kodesh Baruch Hu do it that way? Why not just do things that have immediate goals? And I said, that's a very good question. I don't know the answer. I thought about it for a long time, actually. I think the answer is this. Kodesh Baruch Hu created everything there is. So, all the objects, all the energy, or the laws of nature, spiritual things, concepts, mathematics. He created everything. What about principles? In particular, what about principles that human beings need? Did he create those principles also? Well, just like if he hadn't created water, there wouldn't be any water. If he hadn't created those principles wouldn't exist. Now, human beings need to have means to ends because we can't organize our lives that everything should be an end unto itself. Our world isn't set up like that for ourselves. Human beings need contingency plans, as I said 2 minutes ago, because we don't know the future. We don't know what's going to happen. And we should be prepared, as best we can, for the alternatives that might happen. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't somehow bring into being means to ends, there wouldn't be means to ends. You wouldn't be able to do anything unless it was directly a fulfillment of some purpose. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself didn't bring into existence contingency plans, there wouldn't be contingency plans, and we wouldn't be able to use them. So one of the reasons why HaKadosh Baruch Hu does something is in order to bring something into existence so that it can be available for human beings. Now, let's apply that to Vayichulu. The 6 days of creation were periods of time of creation of new categories of things. Suppose HaKadosh Baruch Hu continued to do that forever. Then we wouldn't be able to stop either, because stopping isn't built into the creation process at all. It's not part of building the world. He has to cease so that we will be capable of ceasing. Otherwise, we wouldn't have it. This, I think, is the really deep explanation, a really deep explanation of our being told in the 10 pronouncements at Sinai, not the 10 commandments, that's a mistake, 10 pronouncements at Sinai, that we should cease doing malacha just as he did. And as I have said a number of times in Shurim, that just as he did should shock you. He did it, so we should do it? What? We should be like him? We should imitate him? Why should we do that? He's the infinite, transcendent, incomprehensible creator, and we are finite, limited creatures. Why should we be like him? Why should we do what he does? If there were a principle of Judaism that said, since he's the infinite, transcendent creator and you're a finite creature, you can't be like him. It's inconceivable to be like him. We would all nod our heads and say, of course not. That's ridiculous. How can we be like him? So when the Torah tells us we should be like him, we should be very surprised. But here I'm seeing a meaning for the idea that we keep Shabbos because he stopped, because if he didn't stop, we wouldn't be able to stop. There would be no stopping. What was the creation missing? Rest. The creation was missing rest. But now, rest as a principle. Of course, you bring rest as a principle into existence by resting. And that means you bring it into existence by not creating anything. That's exactly what the Torah is telling us here. All the creations were finished on the 6 days. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu finished his work on the 7th day, because his work includes more than creating things. It includes bringing principles into existence. And the principle he wants to bring into existence is the principle of rest, cessation. And the only way you can bring the principle of rest and cessation into existence is by not creating anything. That's what resting means. So it says all the creating of things was finished on the 6 days. And he finished on the 7th day all the work that he did, all the work that he needed to accomplish, by not doing any of the work that he did before. But by resting on the work that he did before, that's how he brought resting into existence. So I think this is a very important general idea. I suppose, I can't even remember now whether I thought of other examples of principles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings into existence by his own actions, that he makes those principles available to us, where the way you get to it logically is, you see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does something, he does something for a purpose, and you think, from his point of view, this purpose shouldn't be necessary. And then, at least sometimes, the answer is, it's true, it shouldn't be necessary for him, but he did it, so it should be available for us. Like contingency plans, like means to ends. Yeah?
What is the difference between this type of rest and this type of not doing, and the type of not doing before he wasn't doing, before the 6 days?
Okay, I'm going to just answer you with a trick. You're asking what the difference between, well, first I'll answer you straight, then I'll play the trick. The difference is that from the end of the 6 days on, he is maintaining the existence of all the categories of things that he created before. That's why I said categories of things. I said on Shabbos and thereon, he no longer is bringing new categories into existence. But of course, as we have said a number of times, nothing would exist now. A table couldn't exist unless HaKadosh Baruch Hu was providing it with the energy to exist. That's a constant process that is going on. So that's one way to answer your question. The other way is to point out that before it created is not a sensible description, because time is a feature of the creation. When you say A is before B, you mean A and B are both in time, and A is earlier than B. Before the creation is a contradiction in terms, because outside of the creation there's no time at all. Time is a feature of the creation. So one cannot ask what was going on before he created the world. Even though you find that phraseology, it has a different meaning. It doesn't mean that strictly. Yeah.
Just about the introduction of the principles into the world, then how to see free will, since free will could be the only way to go against his will. Like the introduction of the principle of free will into existence.
Yes.
It's how is it enabled? If it's like some sort of exception to all the other principles that have been introduced into the world, because it goes against it.
I'm not quite sure. First of all, it's a free will. Let's see how free will is related here. The two principles that I mentioned are principles of using free will. They are principles of how free will should be used. Contingency plans is something that you choose to create for yourself. Means to ends is how you organize your actions. So I don't see any competition between principles like that and free will. That's one point. The other point is free will itself is a principle. He created creatures that have the capacity to act in a way that isn't dictated by his causality. There are no limits on his power, so it's not a contradiction in terms. Why would it be a contradiction in terms?
No, it was just thinking like it's the only principle that actually goes against any like it enables. It's the only principle that enables something in existence to go against its will.
Okay, so now I think go against here has two different meanings. And this is really very fundamental and very important.
Yeah.
Can we do something against the Kodesh Baruch Hu's will? Well, if will means decision that it should be, of course not. You can't fight with the Kodesh Baruch Hu's decision. But what happens when Kodesh Baruch Hu wants us to do something of our own free will? Like when he commands us. He wants us to do it of our own free will. Then his will can't bring it about. Because if he's bringing it about, we're not doing it of our own free will. So then if you say, but then you can use your free will to contradict his will, the word will there doesn't mean decision to bring it about. Will there means preference for what you should do. There the word ratzon in Hebrew is closer to want than to deciding and bringing it about. So, and the word ratzon can be used either way. Hu rotzeh lavo means he wants to come. Not that he wills to come, but he wants to come. So if a Kadosh Baruch Hu wills that something should be, it will be, and nothing can fight against that. One of the things he wills to be, that is that there should be creatures whose decisions aren't forced by his own will and his own power. That he wills there to be such creatures. And there are such creatures. We then say that with our free will we can violate his will. By will there we don't mean decision that it should be. There we mean his preference for what we should choose. That's a very, very important distinction. The word will is used both ways, so it does make it confusing, but it's very important to make that distinction. Yeah.
There's no principle of failure that Hashem put into the world because you can't attach failure to Hashem. So how can we have a possibility of failure? How can there be a possibility of failure for us?
Principle of failure. Okay, following out the logic that I gave you, it's a reasonable question, but I don't think we have to go too far. Let me take your logic and apply it more broadly, and I think we'll see where the answer comes from. Since there are no limitations on God's power, how can he bring it about that there's something which has limitations in power? Since there's no limitations on God's knowledge, how can he bring it about that there's something that has limited knowledge? Since God's existence is necessary and he is perfection, how is it possible for him to bring about the existence of something whose existence is contingent and isn't perfect? But now I think we're getting to the core of the idea. If God brings something about, that something will be a creature by definition, because God is bringing it about. And a creature is different from creator because the creature is made by something else, whereas the creator isn't. So, of course, in making a creature, by definition, God is making something which doesn't have his own characteristics. That's built into the project of making any creature whatsoever. It could be an angel, it could be anything. So we can't ask for identity to God's qualities, right? Because then there wouldn't be any creatures at all. There would just be God. So those things that are built into being a creature don't need extra explanation.
So why does Hashem need to bring about principles? Why can't he just create? Why can't he do it in some other way? He could do anything.
Why did he have to do it by performing it himself and bringing it into the world? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's an interesting question. You know, there's a difference in logic and philosophy between what we call necessary conditions and sufficient conditions, and it's very common to confuse them. A person's in an accident and he's injured in a life-threatening way, and they take him to the hospital, to the emergency room, and the doctor who's on duty in the emergency room saves his life. So the accident victim says later to the doctor, "Wow, you saved my life," which is true. The emergency room doctor caused him to live. He was the reason why he's still alive. And then the victim says, "Without you, I'd have been dead." And the doctor says, "No, without me, somebody else would have been on duty, and he would have saved your life." The doctor who saved him is the sufficient condition that he's alive. Doesn't mean that that doctor is the necessary condition, that he couldn't have been saved without that doctor. So I'm saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's actions in these cases brought into existence certain principles. That means his actions caused those principles to exist. You're asking, why was it necessary that they be brought into existence that way by his actions? Couldn't they have been brought into existence another way? I think the right answer is yes, they could have, and I don't know why. But it's not. That is not, as I say, any weakness of what I said. I said this is what happened. You're asking whether what happened couldn't have happened in another way. Maybe it could have, and it would be interesting to explore, and we definitely would increase our understanding if we had an answer to your question. But it's not as if the point that I made is somehow less valid than I made than what I said. I was describing the sufficient condition, not a necessary condition. And since we've mentioned this, I want to give you an illustration of this, which it's very easy to make this mistake. Many years ago, gosh, I guess maybe this was in the 70s, I was at a Jewish student conference in Chicago, and there was a speaker who said the following: we have to be very thankful for the fact that millions of Jews emigrated from Europe at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, to America, also to other places, but largely to America, because that meant that even though the Holocaust took place, there was a large community of Jews who survived. Because if they hadn't come to America, then all those Jews wouldn't have survived. They'd all been killed. So I tried to reason with him, but I was not successful. He was very unimpressed by my appeal. As a matter of fact, these Jews' lives were saved by their emigration to America. But who's to say what would have happened if they hadn't emigrated? After all, we understand that history is under the control of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Maybe if they hadn't emigrated, Hitler would have been stopped in Poland, never gone into Russia. Who knows? You don't know what would have happened if things had died differently. You can't say that if they hadn't come to America, they would have died. That's another scenario of history, and you have no way to predict what would have happened under those conditions. This, in fact, was the necessary condition, the sufficient condition. This is what made it happen. But you have no right to say that it's a necessary condition as well. People when they want to express gratitude, they sometimes exaggerate the contribution of the person they're thanking. Without you, I never would have. But you don't know that. And it shouldn't be necessary. What you should say to the person is, you did this for me. You brought this about. I'm grateful to you because you brought it about. Without going further and saying, without you, it never would have happened. So, yeah.
You're treating them as a shliach, and really you should be only grateful to Hashem. I mean, they're just a shliach. It's like being grateful to anything else. It's like I guess you could be grateful to shliach, but like that's like being grateful to an angel for doing something, or something like that.
Well, generally speaking, angels don't have free will. So that's like the person who wanted to go to surgery saying thank you to the knife. That would be unusual. Not to mention absurd. But when you're talking about a creature that has free will, why shouldn't you say thank you?
Then he's just a sufficient condition.
So why shouldn't you say thank you? I don't understand. He did it. He actually did it for you. Suppose there are two people there who are each of which is willing to help me. But the one that helped me, deserves a thank you because he's the one who actually helped me. He benefited me. Thank you means, what does thank you mean? And I think we have a phrase in Hebrew called akaras hatov, which literally means recognizing the good. and I thought about it for a while, I think gratitude in English is richer than hakaras hatov. And I think it comes out that gratitude in English is double hakaras hatov. Number one, I have to recognize that I received something that's good. My condition is better now than it was before. Secondly, I have to recognize, the second hakara, recognize that it comes from something good in the one that gave it to me. Because there are reasons why people give good things to other people which aren't good. The reasons aren't good. There are times where A gives to B in order to make B dependent upon A. So the B can't become independent of A. That happens with parents who don't want their children to be too independent because they don't want to lose the closeness with the children. They want to make them dependent. That's not good for the child. They're giving them lots of good things, but they're doing it out of an ego insufficiency in themselves. So gratitude applies when you have a double hakaras hatov, that I received something good, and the person who gave it to me out of goodness in him. Not recognizing that would be morally blind, it would be morally obtuse. What else is gratitude for? Yeah.
But he's not fully a sufficient condition. Then he's just like half a sufficient condition because the other guy could have chose not to do it.
Then you're confusing necessary and sufficient now. It's sufficient condition means causing it to come about. I have a package. I happen to have a broken leg. I can't carry the package. And George says, I'll carry the package for you. He moved the package to its destination. He brought it about that it got there. He's a sufficient condition. As a matter of fact, George had said, no, Peter would have taken it for me. Okay. That means that George wasn't necessary, but he was fully sufficient. He's the one who made it happen. That's what sufficient means. Okay. So that's what I wanted to tell you about Vayichu. Then we have a little more time. Let's talk about V'shamru, which is at the end of, at the beginning. Sorry, beginning Shemona Esrei.
One question about a word.
Yes, sir.
So what's the Tzevam? What's the legion? What does it refer to? Like what's the? It says like they finished the heavens and earth and.
Well, strictly speaking, the heavens and the earth are places. They're places. So here means, I think they translated it correctly here. They say, they're legion, right? No, that's not a translation. That's just meaningless English. It means all the inhabitants, all the things that fill those places. In fact, in the beginning of which paragraph? Ela toldos Shemayim va'aretz. Toldos means things that they give birth to. It's as if these places, the things sprout out of the places. That's the image that you have there. Toldos Shemayim va'aretz. Okay, let's take a look on page 337 at V'shamru. So let's just try the plain shot first, and then I'll see what I can get to this. The children of Israel shall keep Shabbos to make the Shabbos an eternal covenant for the generations. Between me and the children of Israel, it is a sign forever that in 6 days, Hashem made heaven and earth. On the seventh day, he rested and was refreshed. Okay, I was thinking something that was in a different text, but that's okay. So now, first of all, keep in the Hebrew is v'shamru. Lishmor is associated with negative commandments. The prohibitions of malacha, of creative physical work, are included in that word, like shomer, and the text in Deuteronomy of the 10 pronouncements says shomer Hashem HaShabbos. And then it says, to make. So there's a little tension between keep and make. Keep meaning negative commandments, which means don't do anything, and lasos, which means to make. You could put it together and say, by keeping it, by not doing any malacha, that's the making. Similar to what we said about bringing rest into the world as a principle, the very fact that you don't do malacha on it makes the Shabbos. Now, what does it make about the Shabbos? Well, first thing it says, it's a covenant. And then it says that it's an os, a sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the heavens and the earth. So let's see how we can work that out. By not doing malacha, it's a covenant and it is a sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the heavens and the earth. Well, first of all, by our not doing physically creative activity, what we are behaving is almost identical to what Hashem behaved by stopping to create new physical categories on Shabbos. We're stopping physical creativity. If a non-Jew, so a Jew who doesn't know anything about Judaism, would notice our activities on Shabbos, he'd be very puzzled. Shabbos morning, you come home from shul, and you eat, and then a pot is brought up, a pot with a stew. Oh, a stew! How nice. Let me tell you, I'm a cook. Let me ask you, when did you put up the stew? How many hours ago? 2 hours ago? 3 hours ago? How long did the stew cook? 18 hours! You're kidding. 18 hours? Stew cooked 18 hours? Why did you do that? Like, that's not how you cook stew, 18 hours? Well, you see, on Saturdays we don't start any cooking. We don't do that. Really? Friday night, you're sitting there and you're having a wonderful discussion, and then suddenly the host says, oh, we have to finish. I have to clear the table because in 20 minutes the lights are going out. And the guest says, what? Well, the lights are on the clock. The lights are on the clock. The lights are going out, so you have to finish quickly? Why not reset the clock? How's that for an idea? Set it to go off later. We don't do that. On Saturdays, we don't do that. Sorry, I can't help you. Or maybe that isn't a good case because I'm preventing it from turning them off then. The lights are not going on. The temperature, it's got very cold in here. Let's turn up the heat. No, sorry, we don't do that. All the kinds of things, that you would normally do that you don't do on Shabbos, any onlooker is going to be very, very puzzled. Why are you behaving this way? Where did you get these rules from? Say, well, actually, we got these rules from the creation of the world. We are not engaging in physically creative behavior because, in a certain sense, that's what the Kodesh Baruch Hu stopped doing on Shabbos. And we're living up what he... So then, our activity becomes a sign of the creation. A sign is something that advertises something to somebody else. And here, it's going to be a sign just by virtue of the behavior that we engage in. Now, I put in an extra feature here, which I'm now going to subtract with the following question. Given that the mitzvahs of Shabbos are two, basically, don't do malacha, this kind of physical creative behavior, and make kiddush, which is a recital of a certain text, which could take, 90 seconds. Biblically, that's all you have to do is recite the text. Rabbinically, it's said to drink a cup of wine. Also, what would happen if a person made kiddush Friday night, drank the wine, okay, you could say that, and goes to sleep for 25 hours? Wakes up Saturday night. What biblical Shabbos mitzvah didn't he do? Made kiddush. That's a biblical Shabbos mitzvah. He didn't do any malacha. He was asleep. Okay, he fulfilled that biblical Shabbos prohibition. There are no other biblical mitzvos of Shabbos. There aren't any. Are we to imagine that this is the Torah's conception of Shabbos? That this is a perfectly valid, perfectly reasonable Shabbos to have? Just make Kiddush and then sleep it off? Presumably not. But then, why not? Who told you that? Because you did the mitzvah of Kiddush and you didn't violate any malacha. One answer, basic idea I got from Rabbi Meiselman, one answer is that here it calls it a covenant and a sign. Now, biblically, it doesn't give us any rules how to perform the covenant or give the sign. What did I tell you? I told you that you're sitting down to the stew at 12 o'clock on Shabbos, and somebody asks you when did it start to cook, and you're eating it, and he says, 18 hours? That's crazy. That's because you're awake and eating the stew, isn't it? If you'd made Kiddush Friday night and slept 25 hours, you wouldn't be demonstrating anything. No one would see anything in your behavior other than gross laziness. So here the Torah indicates themes, and a great raft of rabbinic legislation is designed to express these themes. And this gives you insight into a kind of biblical legislation where the purpose that's being served is a biblical purpose, but the authority for the legislation is rabbinic. There's a kind of hand-in-glove relationship between the rabbinic relationships and the Torah, because the biblical text gives you the theme that the rabbis are trying to express. We are now 24 hours from Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a very good example of this. Hanukkah is a celebration of a miracle that God did for salvation for the Jewish people. The theme is the theme of Pesach. The Baruch Hu did miracles to save us from slavery and took us out of Egypt. The theme of celebrating God's salvations by acknowledging them and praising and thanking Him for them is a theme that's built into the biblical text. The rabbi said, well, Hanukkah is an example where it's worthy of having such a celebration. And Purim also. So when you look at rabbinic legislation, one mustn't just make a clean break between biblical legislation and rabbinic legislation and say, one's biblical and the other's rabbinic, and this is what the rabbis invented, end of story. There are intimate connections and relationships between the biblical and the rabbinic. That's one, and you have to look at the meals and the clothing, the dressing of the clothing, and the prohibition against preparation for the next day, and the prohibition against exhausting yourself with meaningless behavior, or doing calisthenics, which you could do the rest of the week. You don't have to do on Shabbos. These are things which are rabbinic, but they're meant to express this biblical theme. The other deep example of this, is what's called an asmachta. Sometimes the rabbis started a Talmudic discussion. Where does this law come from? And they bring a verse, and they try to see how the verse implies the law, and the attempt is defeated. And the Gemara says, no, it's an asmachta ba'alma, which means that the verse does not imply the law, does not establish the law. Asmachta means you place things together. You push them together so they're touching, but just touching. One doesn't grow out of the other. One doesn't support the other, just touching. Okay, so the law was made, and the verse was not its real source. So what is it? What kind of relationship is it? Here the Rambam says that it is just a memory device. That's the Rambam. The Ritva, commenting on that view without mentioning the Rambam's name, is very adamantly opposed. Just a memory device? Absolutely not. The Maharal has a whole explanation, the Ber Hagola, and explains it as follows. The rabbis saw in the verse a certain principle, and that was the inspiration for making the law that they wanted to make. Not that the verse needed it. If they weren't under these circumstances, they wouldn't have made the institution at all. They didn't derive the need for the institution from the verse. But once they have a need for such an institution, the verse becomes the inspiration for how they do it. So, for example, there's a concept of tuma. Tuma means you've been in contact with things which disqualify you from going into the temple or eating holy foods. Or it disqualifies you from contact with holy things. Tuma has one rule. It's the whole person, period. No exceptions and no halfway mark. You're either a tummy or you aren't. The rabbis invented tuma for the hands, just the hands. Why did they do that? How did they do that? Where did they get the idea of tuma for the hands? Well, the answer is this. There's one place in the Torah where it says, a person in this condition shouldn't do these and these things unless he goes to mikveh and purifies himself, because he's tamei. But the words for going to mikveh are, Yodav lo shotaf b'mayim. He didn't wash his hands in water. So if you're clued in and you look at that verse, you think, what? Didn't wash his hands with water? You can't remove tumah by washing your hands with water. You have to go to mikveh and immerse your whole body. Here the Torah told us that you have to immerse your whole body by using the words, he didn't wash his hands. Why did it do that? Why did it use those words for something else? One thing the rabbi saw in it, according to Maral, is that your hands are somehow the pinnacle of Tumah, the most graphic expression of Tumah. When you look at the body and the whole of the body is Tameh, you should see the hands glowing, sparkling light. Because in Tumah, the hands are prominent. The hands are paramount. That's why the Torah used that verse to teach you that in respect to Tumah of the whole body, the hands are paramount. And if I'm not mistaken, the Maharal there says, or somebody else says, most Tumah is contracted by touching. So it even has a practical side. You usually become Tameh by touching something that's Tameh. Okay, so now the rabbi said, we want to make sure that Kohanim don't eat Truma when they're Tameh, and we want an institution to remind them to check themselves whether they're Tameh or not. But we don't want this institution to be too intrusive. We don't have to tell them, before you eat a meal, you have to go to mikveh. That's really very taxing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a mini tumah on the hands. I'm going to tell them, wash your hands. Wash your hands. They think, why am I washing my hands? Oh, the rabbi said my hands are tummy. Yeah, but wait a minute. What about my body? Am I tummy? Am I Torah? I'm going to eat truma. Can't do that if I'm tummy. Let's check. What happened since the last time I went to mikveh? Maybe I do. Did I touch a sheretz? Was I in the house of a dead person in a cemetery? Where have I been? This is the point of it, is to avoid tumah of the body, which is biblical. But the institution creates a tumah on the hands because there's a verse that says hands are specially prominent with respect to tumah. That's why the Maharal explains in Asmachta, that if you look at the pasuk that the rabbis associated with the law, you can see a motivation for the structure of the law, the application of the law. Again, not that the verse requires the law, but once you have a need for a law to serve a certain purpose, this is the inspiration that you have for using this type of technique to serve that need. Yeah.
And so, the Sher Kedishon, the mitzvahs of the Tzivanu, so we're saying that Hashem commanded us directly to wash our hands.
Who put in the word directly? You did. It doesn't have to be there. The Gemara asks this question. There's a verse that says that you shall not turn aside from what they tell you right or left. There's another verse that says that you'll behave yourself al pi Torah she'arucha, according to the Torah that they teach you. And those are the sources which tell us the rabbis have divine authority to make commandments for us. That's what the Sher Kedishon. He commanded us to follow what they say. And this has a very important, fairly subtle implication. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's Rabbi Kiva points this out. You can't violate a rabbinic command by accident. Because the command is based on verses which says, do what they say. So the only violation is to rebel and say, no, I'm not going to do what they say. So if it's by accident, you didn't violate. There's no such thing as violating a rabbinic commandment, b'shokek. The commandment itself doesn't contain that restriction. Because what the Torah told you to do is follow their instructions and not rebel against their instructions, not to rebel against their authority. And if you don't know that you're doing something they prohibited, you're not rebelling against their authority.